That's right, I'm starting a video with a deep sigh, so I don't know if that makes me a real YouTuber now, but I'm not the one with something to apologize for. Hi everyone, it's LadyJenevia. After making my Shadow and Bone videos in which I discussed the adaptation of various books from the Grishaverse into live action, more specifically the Netflix series that I believe will be premiering sometime later this year, it was requested that I do a video on the BBC One drama Gold Digger. Whenever a new project boosts or rejuvenates an actor's popularity, then the fans become inclined to go back and watch things from that person's past body of work. Since Shadow and Bone has both Ben Barnes and Archie Renaux in it, it's only natural that people will then want to go check out BBC One's Gold Digger because both of those actors are in that series as well. It's cute how both of them have been posting on social media telling people, "Oh, US viewers, make sure you tune in and watch Gold Digger on this app you've never heard of," as if they were not informed already that we have the internet, so folks that want to watch Gold Digger have already watched Gold Digger, regardless of what country they live in. Let me be very clear here when I say that I did not like Gold Digger. Regardless of it having a decent roster of actors comprising its main cast, the writing for the plot and the characters, I am not telling you that you cannot or should not watch it. Ultimately, that is your own decision, but I will give a disclaimer that this video will contain spoilers, so proceed at your own discretion. Gold Digger is a miniseries that aired on BBC One at the end of 2019. It was marketed as a drama that would focus on the relationship between an older woman and a younger man. In the first of its 6 episodes, the central character, Julia Day, visits a museum on her 60th birthday and meets Benjamin Green, a 36-year-old man who works in copyright. With all the marketing leading up to the show's premiere, one would have assumed that the relationship would be offering up some sort of intelligent commentary about the hypocritical treatment women face when dating younger men, while older men can go after younger women with little to no backlash. In the case of the show's central romance, there are brief moments of insight that were worth developing further, from her initial self-consciousness about her appearance when they first met, her irritation when a bartender mistakes her for being Benjamin's mother, and the stares they receive when walking together through Devon. When the show first begins, you are led to believe that the central mystery will be about whether or not Benjamin truly has good intentions with his romantic pursuit of Julia, or if he's hiding more insidious financial reasons for wanting to be with her. If the show had been 8 or 10 episodes, it might have had enough room to effectively depict the issues it tried to cram in, instead of botching them. Instead, the show spirals into a hodgepodge of underdeveloped story arcs and the most unlikable ensemble of characters I've watched in a while, regardless of how capable the actors in the cast are. There's a lot to unpack here, and instead of working my way through the show sequentially, I'm going to focus more on the characters themselves. Julia's story would have been better off if it had either focused more on addressing the general societal stigmas against relationships between older women and younger men, or the mystery of whether or not Benjamin's intentions are good or bad. Though both were leading aspects of the show's marketing, these facets are often sidelined as the show overexerts itself by trying to delve deep into the other leading characters' many personal issues, without offering any meaningful arcs for the vast majority of them. Each episode has a title that applies to the people that are most significant in Julia's life, such as her daughter, her baby, or her rival. And in each of these episodes, those titular characters are given a boost in screen time and attention from the writing. It's a bit like the Skins format, but without the likable characters. Throughout Julia's story, they drag out the reveal that her former marriage was an abusive one at an excruciatingly slow pace. Anything I might have appreciated about the horror style used for the flashback sequences is lost considering how little care they give to such sensitive subject matter. Are we supposed to feel that she's now empowered from having left this marriage? The marriage only ended because her ex-husband Ted had an affair with her former best friend Marcia, both of whom I'll talk about later, as opposed to the fact that he was abusive. All of the layers to her tumultuous history with Ted are not explored properly because the show is too busy spending time exposing how damaged their adult children are, which isn't that surprising since they were raised by the absolute worst parents. Julia has 3 children with Ted. The oldest is Patrick. He has a lot of resentment towards his father for cheating on his mom. They make a point of showing how upset he is about it, and the fact that he entirely blames his father for the dissolution of the marriage. In the first episode, he is given more screen time, and we are introduced to the fact that he is tempted to cheat on his wife. Why? Great question. Do we ever get an answer to that question? No, we do not. An affair is unethical to begin with, but it really does not help the audience to sympathize with Patrick that his wife is nothing but loving and supporting. She's caring, attentive, is great with their children, and yet he just starts up this affair because his parents suck? His whole story is a mess. It's not as if the temptation of the affair and his refusal to get into it in episode 1 is the start of him learning to be better than his father's worst qualities. Guess what, Patrick? A whole lot of us are running around with unresolved childhood trauma. You have a loving wife and kids and enough money to go to a top-tier therapist. Even if you wanted to be stingy, you live in the UK. You have the NHS. You have access to get help. Stop being terrible. He is also aggressively determined to find proof to expose Benjamin as a gold digger. At one point, his sister Della even points out to him that he's doing all of this work to meddle in his mom's relationship, and in the process he's doing everything he can to avoid being at home with his wife and family. They never really dig deeper into that though. It's just another half-baked story for an unlikable character. The last major thing he does is threaten Benjamin. He got an anonymous note about his affair and assumed that it was from Benjamin, and since Patrick has all the cunning of a broken office chair, he corners Benjamin after the wedding between Benjamin and Julia. He shows him the note and demands that he keep his mouth shut. Except Benjamin says he didn't know about the affair until that moment, and tells Patrick that now he's fine with keeping it quiet, just as long as Patrick stops trying to meddle in Benjamin's relationship with Julia. If you're wondering who really sent the note, that's a great question, and they never answer it, because this show cannot do a damn thing right for 95% of its characters. Della is the middle child, and she's also the only likable character in this hellscape. She is a struggling stand-up comedian, and what you have to know about both her and Patrick is that they both remember a particularly violent encounter between their parents where Ted attacked Julia, then tried to take his own life. Afterwards, Julia pretended like it never happened with them, and when the two of them finally confront her about it, Julia is so horrified and claims that she assumed that they just wouldn't remember. This was such a deeply upsetting story to watch play out, and it makes no sense either because Patrick, the eldest child, was 8 years old when this happened. He could have been 3 years old and he still would have remembered it. It is absolutely absurd, and the problem with this happening is that it sucks out any remaining investment I had in her as a character. And this revelation doesn't come at the end of the series either. Poor Della is the only character with any semblance of self-awareness. She is deeply flawed, but says out loud what her bad habits are, as she notes this cycle that she's in of sabotaging the happy relationship she has with her on-again, off-again girlfriend, whom she's still in love with since their previous breakup. She's the only person in Julia's immediate family that at least tries to give Julia and Benjamin's relationship a chance. She has some skepticism about it at first, but once her mother expresses a greater depth to her feelings about this relationship, Della is willing to support her mother and tells her mother directly that she deserves to be happy. This in turn inspires Della to pursue her own happiness and push herself to work through her own self-sabotaging so she can finally find happiness with her girlfriend. Leo is the least developed of the children, and that's not just because he's the youngest. When he is first introduced, he is entirely obsessed with money, and to be clear here, we never really see any proof that he moves past that, but that's besides the point. He is super rude and insensitive towards his mother. He makes jokes directly to her about her being old, and he makes cold and callous comments behind her back that his concern about her dating Benjamin is because he is worried that Benjamin will take away from his cut of her fortune. He is entirely devoted to his father, and Patrick and Della note to Julia how Leo was too young to be aware of the violent incident that the two of them remember. There's a point in the show where they make it seem like Patrick and Della are going to try to talk to him and inform him of the truth about their father, and you would assume that such an important family conversation like this would be shown to us, the audience, but nope, we only hear from Patrick and Della sometime later on, telling Julia that they tried to talk to him but he wouldn't listen. Leo tries to orchestrate a scheme to get his parents back together, but it fails spectacularly, because why the hell would Julia want to get back with her old, ugly, cheating, abusive ex-husband when she's already got Benjamin pining after her? Sure, Benjamin has a multitude of issues that we will get to later, but at least in comparison to Ted, he comes across like a young hung stallion. Leo, you naive little child. Anyway, we get a huge revelation, which is that Leo knew his father was having an affair for a year and never told his mom. She doesn't even confront him about this right away, and only throws it out there when Leo tricks her and Ted into spending time with him together, and Ted starts being himself, so they start arguing, and that's when Julia brings it up.
Thank you, son. Told you he was on my side.
I'm not on the side.
Oh, so you didn't pick your father's side when you hid his affair from me?
This was something that bothered me so much. Julia would find out about these massive secrets the people in her life were keeping from her, but then she would take forever to bring them up. She would just let it fester, and then maybe she would blow up about it later, but not necessarily get any real answers about whatever the secret was. There's an incident where she finds out Benjamin was lying about something, and she doesn't bring it up right away, but then the scene just jumps abruptly to her throwing some of his belongings into a bonfire that she made, and then they have a big fight about it. It's so jarring because they don't show a natural progression of her emotional escalation. In general, a lot of these characters are awful at just having a conversation about the important things that are or have been going on. It got so bad that after I finished watching the show, I had to call one of my mates back in England and vent about what I had just watched. We had to talk about it for hours, and I was just imploring them to give me some answers as to whether there was some niche cultural variable that I was missing that could help me to better understand what the hell I had just watched. Anyway, getting back to Leo here, even after Julia confronts him about the affair, he never gives her an answer as to why he would hide the affair for a year, and whatever excuses he makes about it to other characters are poppycock. He sort of manages to separate himself from idolizing his father by the end of it, but again, it's hardly satisfying considering how little growth he has from his main flaws that the show presents, and the fact that they never dug into him learning how truly abusive his father was. It's all extremely frustrating. Marcia is the ex-best friend of Julia, and not only did she have an affair with Ted, they end up in a relationship that continues after Julia and Ted's divorce. Initially, when they try to contextualize why she would get into an affair with Ted in the first place after having been best friends with Julia for decades, the context seems to work well enough, all things considered. Her husband died tragically, and she felt really guilty, broken up, and vulnerable after his passing. Ted comforted her, and there we have it, the start of an affair. The problem lies in the fact that despite Julia and Ted's attempts to keep his violence hidden from their kids, after that one particularly violent incident anyway, you cannot expect the audience to believe that her best friend at no point would be suspicious. He's violent physically, verbally, and emotionally, and if this group was as close as we're led to believe, you cannot expect us to think that Marcia didn't at least have some sort of suspicions about how he really is. He's so unbelievably bad at hiding it. He ticks so many boxes of being a textbook abuser. He also has a problem with alcohol, yet the show never addresses any possibility of her knowing he was abusive before getting into a relationship with him, and what the implications of that are on how we understand her as a character. It really takes a lot to be the most unlikable character in a sea of unlikable characters, but Ted, he really manages that. Throughout his run on the show, he gaslights Julia, he's condescending, conceited, malicious, nasty, mean-spirited, and that's all before we know that he's a full-blown abuser. Very early on in the series, he gets so mad at one point while arguing with Marcia that he headbutts a wall in their house. I'm going to interrupt the flow of footage here because I really want to make sure that all of you hear me and understand me. Ted gets so angry that he headbutts a wall in their house, and it's just never addressed. Is this something that he does often? Does Marcia think that this is normal? We're not going to unpack that? That's really the running tagline of Gold Digger as a show. We are not going to unpack that. So many things get introduced on this show that you think are going to go somewhere or get explained or developed, and none of them are. In the end, Julia and Ted have another encounter alone in the woods where he becomes so enraged that she doesn't actually want to get back together with him, even though he's the one that's been insisting the whole time that she's only dating Benjamin to get back at him because he's so full of himself, and he proceeds to downplay the severity of the abuse he inflicted on her. He also proceeds to hit her again. I'm not going to show it in this video because, to be quite honest, it deeply upset me. I've enjoyed loads of films or series where women get injured in action sequences, and the difference is the context. Take Charlie's Angels 2000 for example, since it's one of my all-time favorite films, and I've even made a video about it on this channel. All of the angels get into violent confrontations at one point or another, but the difference is that this is part of the territory of their jobs. They're also incredibly physically strong, practically superhuman, since the film often employs things like wire fu and a generally exaggerated style. Julia is not a superhero or a spy, and she does not exist in any sort of exaggerated world where all of the main characters are being subjected to a hyperbolic amount of violence. This is meant to be a realistic drama in the world as we know it, and the absolute last thing I wanted to see when tuning into what I thought would be a compelling drama addressing the hypocritical judgment against women for getting romantically involved with men younger than them is to see an everyday 60-year-old woman getting hit in the face by her deranged, violent ex-husband. These two are such horrendous characters, and it's incredibly unpleasant to watch not only an abusive man with a battered woman, but the long-term damage that their abuse and ineptitude as parents have done to all of their children. The difficult subject matter is not the issue here. It's the fact that there is no legitimate growth to any of these characters except for Della, and how little acknowledgement or accountability there is among any of these characters regarding their flaws or wrongdoings. What sort of resolution or takeaway is the audience supposed to have by the end of the series? Because I had none. It's really easy for Benjamin to look like an appealing love interest when you have someone as awful as Ted to compare him to. However, he still sucks. The writing for him is a mess. In episode 1, when Julia introduces him to her children, there's this moment where Patrick asks him about a tattoo peeking out from under his sleeve, and Benjamin hides it without answering the question. Naturally, my assumption was that this would be returned to as some important bit of context about his past, his motivations, or his character, but nope. It's yet another thing that is introduced for no good reason, with nothing significant or meaningful to add to the larger story. The whole age gap stigma they're meant to be facing is ridiculous. He's 36 and she's 60. They're both fully grown adults that are more than capable of making their own decisions to be in a relationship with one another. It's not as if he's 18 and she's 42. That would be weird. They could have made this story interesting. They could have focused on how absurd it is for her family to be infantilizing her into thinking she cannot decide to date a 36-year-old adult man. Just because she's been battered doesn't mean that she's stupid. She is skeptical when starting her relationship with him. And at one point, she even notes how she's the one that has been paying for the fancy London hotel rooms that they've been staying in together. There's a whole subplot about a prenup that bothers me because it's underdeveloped just like everything else in this show. She doesn't want to ask Benjamin to sign one, which she absolutely should, just like everyone getting married should, regardless of what either one of their financial circumstances are, but that's besides the point. But once she gets suspicious of him, she decides to forge his signature on the prenup. So she's suspicious of him enough to want a secret prenup, but not suspicious enough to just not marry him. Do you see what I mean about the lack of development? We're not going to unpack that. So do you just not want to be alone? You don't want to give up that good? Here's the thing about Benjamin. He is constantly lying. All these secrets about him are not revealed by him. It's always other people finding things out about him, and then he has to try to sweet talk his way out of it so Julia won't end their relationship. She has that one blow up at him I mentioned earlier, and they also have a big falling out in the very last episode, but more often than not, she just takes him back. Here's the thing, Julia. When you have this many incidents of Benjamin lying, it's a pattern of behavior. He didn't tell you about his money problems. He lied by saying he was an only child, and then his secret brother showed up. Well, half-brother, but that's besides the point. He also didn't tell you he went to jail for murder as a teen, regardless of the fact that he took the fall for his half-brother's actions. Also, when he tries to propose to her, he gets weirdly physically aggressive with her to the point that the audience can't help but wonder if he's trying to off her so he can presumably run away with her fortune once she's gone. That might be okay to do when you're still in the middle of the mystery about whether or not Benjamin is a gold digger, but by the end, when all these other things have been revealed about his backstory, his behavior here in this moment of proposing to her is just sketchy for no reason. He's just a creepy, sketchy guy. He also yells at Julia after she tries to dump him before their wedding, since she learned he had a whole other name as a child and everyone in his hometown thinks he's a murderer. He's yelling at her because he's mad that he thought she had jumped off of a cliff, but she flinches because she's been abused for decades by her ex-husband, the same ex-husband that literally just assaulted her again in the woods. She flinches, but we're not going to unpack this interaction. He's not going to apologize for scaring her and making her feel like she's back in her abusive marriage? At this point, I think I've made it very clear that I don't like this show. It baffles me that Julia and Benjamin end up together at the end of the series. He has mummy issues. That's another thing that gets dropped in at the end that they just never bother to unpack or explore or address properly. It's an endless stream of lies from him. It's so clear that she does not know him at all, and yet for some reason she still decides to change her mind about changing her mind and go ahead and marry him. And another point that I want to make sure that I mention is that her prenup that she secretly signed, she ripped that up when he confronted her with it, because at the time she had thought, well, it doesn't matter now anyway because I'm not going to marry him because he murdered someone. And then it turned out he didn't actually murder someone, but at the time she thought that he murdered someone. So then she rips it up. But then you're gonna go ahead with the wedding? No prenup? Even if you are dead set on being idiotic, why do you have to get married? Why is it not an option to just continue dating, even though that's a terrible idea, but continue dating and go to couples therapy, but also individual therapy, because both of you are severely lacking in self-awareness and completely oblivious to some debilitating character flaws. And then when all is said and done, the closing shot of this series is them cuddled up together as if they're a regular couple that just got married. Are you out of your mind? Again, I want to reiterate that if you've made it this far and you still would like to watch the show, go for it. It's your choice. I'm not telling you that you're not allowed to watch it. That's not my decision to make. I'm just saying that I genuinely cannot remember a time that a show was this insufferable to watch on so many levels. Usually there's a pretty sizable saving grace. Maybe there are some really likable characters, even if the writing isn't great, or there's an exciting premise, something to be appealing. I mean, if this was more than 6 episodes, I don't even know if I could have finished it. It was pretty agonizing. It was 6 hours, but it felt more like 12. Especially when you consider the fact that this is a BBC One drama. Was I naive for presuming that there is a baseline level of quality, a standard of sorts to be met? Gold Digger felt like a show where the people making it had this long list that they made of issues that they wanted to cram into the show, but then they didn't actually take the time to properly develop any of those issues. And when you consider that they failed to intelligently address or depict the quote-unquote taboo of older women dating younger men, which I thought was the entire main premise of the show in the first place, I will tell you what I personally would have done to overhaul the show into something actually worth watching. And it's a very simple fix to make, I'll have you know. Make it about Della. Picture it now. The star of the story is a sad lesbian with a heart of gold who is using comedy as a coping mechanism because she's so burdened by the trauma inflicted on her by her dumpster fire parents that now she struggles to process and express her emotions in a healthy way. So she's developed a bad habit of self-sabotaging her own happiness and prosperity. But in the end, she nails a big comedy gig and she gets the girl. I would have watched the hell out of that. It would have been cathartic. It would have been beautiful. We would have laughed. We would have cried. It would have been everything. Gold Digger was very difficult to watch in a way that I am not used to experiencing from the fiction that I consume. It was insulting to watch a story be so careless in how it used the issue of domestic violence in the story, as well as the long-lasting damage domestic violence leaves on children into adulthood. What was it that you expected domestic violence survivors to get out of watching this show? Is the audience supposed to be happy that the protagonist went from a horrendously abusive man to a manipulative, shady, can't stop lying man just because the second one is hotter? Are you saying that survivors don't deserve better, or that they're incapable of getting better? And the total lack of accountability from both of these parents about the irreparable damage that they've done to their children made those two all the more insufferable. These children of theirs are adults, and you can see, particularly in the case of the older two children, how they are deeply wounded by having not only witnessed this horrific violence, but the fact that they as children were forced to not talk about it and pretend that everything was okay when they were in pain. I don't take any pleasure in making a review this stern and severe and entirely joyless. What it came down to is that I wanted to make this review because I wish that someone had warned me beforehand what exactly it was that I was going to be subjecting myself to before I decided to watch this series. My next video essay will be on a film that I love, so thankfully we will be able to get out of this unpleasant funk. Subscribe so you don't miss any of my future uploads, and be sure to like and comment because both of those things really help out my channel. You can also follow me on my social medias, which include Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Vero. Stay safe, everyone, look after your health, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!